All right.
All right, we're good to go. Dr. Dixon, first off, I appreciate you for, being willing to come onto the platform, all the work that you're doing in this space. It is needed. So I respect you highly, and I'm really looking forward to today's conversation for sure. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you, brother.
Yes,
All
sir.
right.
Yes,
Hold
sir.
on, my hair a little low here. Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
you good.
better.
You good. And we gotta get comfortable first. I get it. I get it.
No, my son like to play in my chair.
Hey, I used to do the same thing to my dad in his office. So Dr. Dixon, you're from Georgia. I'm from Georgia, born and raised. I've had family gone to Fort Valley State, so they're very familiar with the
Okay.
area. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Growing up in the South, especially in Georgia, how did that shape who you are and the man that you are today?
Okay. Personally, because I did grow up in a country town, rural town, and then we moved outside of the town into the
Wow.
country.
Wow.
And so I ended up growing up on just about 5 acres. Took me about 7 hours to cut the grass.
Wow. Wow.
And so I think the strongest thing about that is my father. He was what we would call a workaholic, right? But the most positive thing is that in each one of us, me and both of my sisters, he instilled a solid work habit, and work ethic.
Yes, sir.
And so I think that's the most. Now, when I got a little older in the early 20s, you kind of lose your way a little bit.
Yeah, I
but
get it.
You come back, to those things that you had learned and you had done the longest. So you come back to those.
Yes,
And
sir.
so personally, I think growing up in the rural area that we grew up in, and the way my father brought us up, and my mother, of course, as well, it gave me a solid work ethic. And I try my best to instill that in my sons as well.
Yes, sir.
And so now, in terms of the other external factors outside of the family core, the thing about, and I tell people all the time, the thing about growing up for me, and it was different from most people, because as you know, where I grew up in Fort Valley, it's predominantly Black. And so it's a predominantly Black town with an HBCU.
That's right.
And so cultural reinforcements were always there for me, through the educational process. And the great Marva Collins has long since proved, that cultural reinforcements within education is just as important as the information itself. And so I was blessed, to be in an environment, because I actually even went to developmental school / pre-K.
Wow.
At Fort Valley State. And so throughout that whole process, the cultural reinforcements were always there in my education. And I understand, that is far from the norm.
Yes, sir.
And that's really the problem, right? That minorities, not just African Americans, but also when you actually look at the Hispanic and Latino community as well.
Yeah.
Because the education and the cultural reinforcements and the cultural dynamics that are with public education are so far away and removed from their culture. They also find it hard, harder in public schools, right?
Yes.
And so that is truly a real problem. I know that's not our topic today, but I have to go there because it is what shaped me. Because I
Yes,
went
sir.
on to an HBCU, and so by the time I got my bachelor's and master's from an HBCU, or really by the time I got my bachelor's and master's from HBCU, I was firmly rooted from very young all the way through. And that, of course, is far from the norm.
That's
and
right.
so that's a problem, and we get that, right? We get young people who see being educated as being white. Right? They
Yes,
equivalent being educated with being white,
yeah,
because white American culture is so enshrouded in the public education system.
right.
And so luckily for me, I was able to have those other cultural reinforcements. But for most, minorities, they don't get that. So it's either, in their mind, it's either be indoctrinated with white American culture, or just get by and do whatever you got to do to pass.
Wow. Yes, sir.
And so the doing whatever you got to do to pass doesn't always work, right?
Yes, sir.
And so what we have to do is get our young people to understand that you can get to a level around middle school, high school, where you can consciously differentiate the two.
Yeah.
But the only way we can get them there is to continue to give them those cultural reinforcements.
That's right.
At pre-K and elementary.
Yeah.
So that when they get to middle school and high school, they can understand and be able to differentiate and be able to know that I can learn this information, right? Without always having to make, a direct linkage to something in society, because that direct linkage is going to be to something in white American culture.
Yeah.
And so we just have to give those reinforcements early, And the sad thing, of course, right now here in Florida, we're in a dogfight, right?
Yeah.
Because DeSantis wants to take away all of those cultural reinforcements. He wants to remove, and if not all, but diminish them to the point where the white American culture is highly dominated. And so we just have to make a stronger effort at home, and even meeting with our teachers more.
That's right.
If you have to ask for your student, or your child rather, to be placed in a Black teacher's classroom, then do so. Do so.
Yes, sir.
If you feel like that teacher is going to provide those cultural reinforcements, and they're tying, let's call it like it is now, they're tying the teacher's hands as well, right?
Yep. Yep.
Because they're making them teach to the test. And they're basing even their bonuses and salaries on how well they can teach
on the test score. Yep. Yep.
Right?
Yes,
and so that does leave even less room to be able to infuse other things, right? Because you have to stay on this narrow, very conformed curriculum now. But there are ways. We've always been able to use examples, right? We use examples whenever we have the ability to reach that child, right? Because as long as you can relate to the information, you can learn it.
That's
and
right.
so a Black teacher has a much, much better chance of being able to relate that information to a Black child by using something in Black culture.
Yes,
you
sir.
know, I once was told that it could be done in every level except mathematics. And I told them, no, that's not true. You can use it in mathematics as well.
That's right.
As long as you find something to relate to.
Yes, sir.
You know, if you have young Black girls who stand there and cook with their mothers, then you can teach them ounces to pounds and things of that nature using what they use in the kitchen.
That's right.
So math is not outside of that purview either. But I get off my soapbox on that.
No. Listen, I'm loving this. I'm loving this. And Doc, you being in Florida, right? Growing up, I love college football, of course. And one of the biggest and coolest mascots that people tried to use, of course, was the Florida State Seminoles, right? But I find it ironic and crazy, whether it's at the time, Washington Redskins, Florida State Seminoles, that white America, they kind of outwardly show us, right? But then when it comes to speaking on who were the Seminoles, these stories aren't taught in everyday history class. Why do you think when it comes to Seminole history, the Black Seminole Project, if you will, why when it comes to talking about those topics at length, why is it always tried to be just suppressed every single time?
Primarily because of when we're talking specifically about the Seminoles, right?
Right.
Well, when we're talking specifically about the Seminoles, they shy away from it because the Seminoles had a very large faction of Black people in it. They intermingled. You hear everything about Geronimo. You hear everything about Sitting Bull and all that, but you don't really hear much about Osceola. The reason you don't hear much about Osceola is because Osceola was mixed. His mother was half Black, half Native American.
Wow.
His father was white. But because his mother belonged in the matrilineal line with his grandmother, he grew up Native American because he belonged to a clan.
That's right.
You see, but you have Black Seminoles who are direct descendants from the Florida Maroons, and you have Black Seminoles that are in ancestral lines with Native Americans, but it is through the paternal line, it's through their father. And the way Native American culture goes is that everything is matrilineal.
Yeah.
So in order to belong to a clan, it has to be through your mother. In order to actually grow up in Native American culture, it has to be through your mother because you have to belong to a clan. And so that's the main reason why Osceola is not talked about, not researched, not done any specific movies on, is because if they do, they would have to tell the truth that he was half Black, half Native American, and most of the warriors in his band, when he would move in different times, especially when they would do guerrilla warfare, where they would hit and run, were Black warriors.
Wow.
And then, of course, he had a Black wife. Now, he had more than one wife. Osceola had quite a few children. But one of his main wives was a Black woman.
Wow.
And she actually was the cause at one time for the Second Seminole War continuing. He was captured along with his Black counterpart, John Horse. And he found out that his wife was on a wagon train about to be shipped out to the Arkansas Territory and put on the Trail of Tears.
Wow.
And John Horse helped him escape, and he went and got her. And the war continued.
Wow.
And so these are the stories that they're not going to tell you. These are the stories they don't want to get out because, again, there's such a strong Black force, there's such a strong Black component, and there is such a strong Black essence for the war itself. See, we saw in at least three different instances in the war where the Black Seminoles, who were now being collectively called Black Seminoles, whether you were in a patrilineal, or you were a recent runaway that joined them. They were Black Seminoles and their allies or Black freedmen, right? And so when we look at those dynamics, right, what we find then is that at three different times during the war, the primary objective of the military was to round up these Blacks and return them to enslavement.
Yeah.
And so when you look at all of those different dynamics, then you actually look at the documents themselves where General Thomas Jefferson, who was over the war, declares that this is not an Indian war, this is a Negro war. You see, then the whole dynamics change. And so then everything that you think about when you think about your quote unquote Indian wars, you think about the Trail of Tears and all of that. And also, I would be remiss if I didn't say this. There is ongoing research, strong ongoing research, where we do have evidence of that relationship between African descendants, Blacks in this hemisphere with the quote unquote Native Americans and Red. And research is beginning to also indicate, and much more research needs to be done, but at what time period we cannot specifically say as of yet with definitive. But we're getting close. But it's strong evidence that Africans or Black people or melanated people, because they may have been here. See, that's the thing. They could have been here the whole time. We don't know yet. We still have research to uncover.
Yes, sir.
So I don't say definitively yet till I get and read and other, because I'm not just relying. I don't think that I'm the sole person to do this. It takes all of us researching to uncover these things. And so as we continue to do so, though, we do know this, though. We know that even Africans were coming to this hemisphere before. We got the Olmecs in South America.
That's right.
We even have Christopher Columbus, who basically says that the current that he used was taught to him by African seafarers. So at the very least, we know Africans were coming over. Now, whether or not Black people was already here, we're still uncovering more and more research, and there's more and more research to do before we can definitively put anything out where it won't be attacked by the Academy. And of course, we know it will be attacked by the Academy because it changes the whole dynamics on civilization.
Yeah.
So that kind of work, though, is ongoing. There are scholars, there are journeymen, not journeymen, but researchers who may not have been to college. It doesn't matter. If you can read and you know how to look up that information, then you're a researcher.
That's right.
And so this information, as they begin to share this information, we can then start putting the pieces together. And then we can definitively outline everything and show definitively the presence of melanated people here in America for what could be considered, or what could be, when I say could be, of course, that's depending on all of the solid researches from the earliest days when there was Atwater land, Gatwater land, and even before that.
Yes, sir.
So research still has to be done in that area, but luckily we have enough conscious people who are looking through records, and we even look to the earliest European records because they even say things themselves. The Spanish, they describe the Arawaks as swarthy, and we know what swarthy means.
Yep.
So there's evidence, not just that we have to uncover, but there's evidence found from all over the world with different cultures.
That's right.
We just have to, like I said, put all of that evidence together in a definitive manner. And I get researchers who want me to say, I'm not saying it until we have all of the definitive. Yes, it does make sense.
Yes,
yes, yeah, that is the most plausible explanation. But no, we need to make definitive, because it has to be a definitive argument because of what we would be going up against.
Yeah.
In terms of getting the correct information out there. So it has to be definitive. We got to get our ducks in a row.
Yes, sir, for sure. Osceola, what makes him so impactful, significant to Seminole history? Why is he so important?
Well, Osceola is important because Osceola rises as what was declared as a war chief. See, he was not a chief. He was not in line to be a chief.
Wow.
As a matter of fact, John Horse has the ascendancy to be a Black Seminole chief quicker or with more understanding than Osceola, because John Horse's father was a Native American chief. So it stands to reason that he would become a Black Seminole chief.
Right.
Now, Osceola, on the other hand, is declared a war chief because of his determination to fight, his fighting prowessness, and his unwillingness to compromise when that was the exact right thing to do, not compromise at those particular times.
That's right.
Now, there were times when they did have to compromise, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say that as well, because we have Native Americans who are upset, saying, "Oh, the Seminoles that went out west, they're quitters, they're this, that, and the other." But they're coming from the wrong line of thinking. Had the Seminoles not migrated out west, they would have been annihilated. Plain and simple. There are no more Temucans. There are no more Guale. There are those who claim ancestry to Guale, but there are no Guale. There is no Guale tribe anymore. There is no Temucans or Timuquans, some say, which is actually the more correct term, Timuquan. There are more. Here's another one. There are no more Comanches now, are there? And they talk about how well they fought. And they fought to the death, literally, because they were annihilated.
Wow.
And so I think they don't understand that had this large number of Seminoles not migrated out west, and had not the number that stayed ended up being pushed into and migrating into the Everglades, they wouldn't still be here.
Wow.
And so they have to understand that. And see, that's the thing about it. We understand that the black faction, Abraham understood that. Abraham knew that they would never stop hunting for them to return them to slavery.
Wow.
He understood that as long as they were in Florida, right? As long as it had the appearance that they were a colony, and they were on their way to becoming a nation, right?
Yeah.
And so had the idea that plantation society, the United States government, and the military were going to allow that to happen was simply false. And Abraham understood that they would go to the very last person if need be.
Wow.
And so that's why in 1838 and in late 1837, when the U.S. government finally gave up and said, okay, if y'all want to go out west and live free, go ahead. Abraham accepted that. Now, there were Black Seminoles that disliked Abraham for that. But unlike those, what we would call at that time, common Black Seminoles, right? Abraham had negotiated with them. Abraham had gone to D.C. He had gone to different military force. He saw the military might. He saw the willingness of white people to do whatever they had to do.
Wow.
To either enslave them or get rid of them.
Wow.
And so he had to negotiate. And when you negotiate, there's no way to negotiate without making certain what? Compromises.
That's right.
There's no way to negotiate without it. And so we do have Black Seminoles, because even Black Seminoles out west to this day don't have the most favorable things to say about Abraham.
Wow.
But it is because of that same thing that Seminole Native Americans are holding on in Florida with that misthought, right?
Yeah.
Same thing they're holding on to in Oklahoma. That Abraham somehow sold him out, or he gave, he ended up being a traitor. No, he ended up saving the community. He ended up saving their lives. He ended up doing what he had to do so that you still have that Black Seminole community in Oklahoma. You have the Black Seminole community in Nacimiento. You have the Black Seminole community in Florida.
That's right.
You got to even have the Black Seminole community in the Bahamas. I wouldn't say so much Bahamas, because that happened about the time Abraham was rising to power. So he really didn't have a big say-so in them getting to the Bahamas. But everything after, everything from 1826 to when John Horse takes over and everything else, is because Abraham paved that way.
Wow.
And so that's one of the things we also look to do with the documentary, right? and that is tell the entire truth for everyone. So that even Black Seminoles in Oklahoma understand. Because I'll never forget, I told a historian here in Florida, you know, the sentiment that Abraham has, because he's, from what I know, he's still in an unmarked grave in the woods in Oklahoma.
Wow.
I saw a YouTube where one of his ancestors, great granddaughter, found it.
Wow.
And so when I told the curator of the State Museum here, she's one of the senior curators here at the State Museum, the sentiment that some Black Seminoles had in Oklahoma on Abraham, she was taken aback. She was like, really? She was like, they wouldn't be out there if it wasn't for him.
Wow.
You know? And so those are some of the things we want to do. We want to do both. We want to talk about Black Seminoles of the past and Black Seminoles of the present, right? Sir. Because that's really what I see, and I've always said as the three parts. There are three phases to the African diaspora and African diaspora studies, right? Or Black studies, however you want to say it.
That's right.
The first phase is to provide a voice to the voiceless, right? In that we are telling these stories, we're providing the information that has been buried and bringing it to life and shedding light on the historical truths. So we're providing that voice to the voiceless, right? The second phase is once you provide the voice to the voiceless, the second thing is to make those cultural ties, right? So that Black Seminoles in Florida understand the cultural ties they have to Black Seminoles in the Bahamas, in Oklahoma, in Texas, and in Mexico.
Right.
And then the third is to use that historical information, use those cultural ties to look for and come up with solutions to issues you're facing today.
That's right.
See, and that's really the three phases that you have of all Black studies, right? You provide that voice to the voiceless. You tell the stories that haven't been told. You make the cultural connection so that we all understand that we are all intricately tied somehow.
Yes, sir.
And then the third is now you use all of that, because there's no need to know it if you don't use it to find solutions for today.
Come on. Yeah.
If you don't do that, then it's just what they've always called to us, right? Which is Black facts. We need more than just Black facts. Black facts have to be turned into viable information for issues today, as well as issues going forward in the future.
Yes, sir. That's powerful, Doc. And America is no stranger when it comes to things like guerrilla warfare, right? Vietnam, that was exposed. But before Vietnam, we had the Great Visible Swamp, right? How did the Seminoles even manage to live inside of an environment where you have mosquitoes, you have alligators, you have all types of things going on? How did they thrive in that area? And then not only thrive, but protect themselves, fight back in the swamps? How did they do those things?
That was through the symbiotic relationship they had with Native Americans.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
When they get to and move, even with the Great Dismal, as well as living in the swamps in Florida, right? They were doing their best to eke out their own existence, right? But it is the Native Americans, right, who began to show them how to hunt certain foods in the swamps.
Mm.
You know, how to go down into those mud gopher holes and bring out those gophers.
Wow.
How to wrestle and deal with, because of course they were doing it on their own.
Yeah.
But Native Americans had already developed techniques and things of that nature. So Native Americans were showing them, because let's call it like it is as well, Native Americans were still just as entrenched in the hunting and gathering phase as they were the agricultural phase. And even a little bit more so. Because the way they did agriculture was that they would grow crops and they would live in one area till the ground goes bad and the food source goes low, and then they pick up and go to another area. But see, as plantation society grew and started encroaching on their land and taking their land, it forced them to live in much smaller areas.
Wow.
So then it's the Blacks who taught Native Americans, no, you can't move now, right? Don't worry, you don't have to. What you have to do now is rotate the crops.
Yeah.
You can't rotate the field, you got to rotate crops. You can't keep growing corn. You can't keep growing wheat right here. You have to change it out. You see? And so it was a symbiotic relationship. They taught them how to be better hunters, right? And then Blacks taught them how to expand their agriculture and be better farmers.
Wow. Wow. That's excellent information. Dr. Dixon, a lot of people don't know Georgia was actually a buffer state, right? Why was
buffer
Georgia?
Zone, yes.
Buffer zone? Why was that?
Because what happens is, initially the Pope gives Spain authority over all North America, from Newfoundland all the way down to the Key Biscayne, right? And of course, the French and the English don't pay the Pope any attention. They say the Pope got no authority to tell y'all can have all of this land.
Right.
And so the French come first. And just like with the Spanish, just like with the English and the French, all of their first colonies failed. It was Guadalupe with the Spanish that failed. Fort Caroline, it was a small area, and then they tried to redevelop the area and they called it Fort Caroline. It failed. And then, of course, for the English, it was Roanoke, right? Roanoke failed. And so once they, however, started becoming successful, right, in colonization, the English started expanding plantation society very fast, rapidly. And so the Spanish and the English were already at war in Europe. See, and the war then spilled over into this hemisphere.
Right.
And it spilled over into of course, the Caribbean, and then it spilled over, of course, into North America. And so a treaty was struck that the Carolinas would have a line of demarcation. La Florida would have a line of demarcation. And the area between those two lines was called the buffer zone. But the English, being who they are, they ignored the treaty.
For sure,
And they moved in and they settled Savannah. And when they settled Savannah, they broke the treaty.
Wow.
And the war continued on in Europe, and they had skirmishes in this hemisphere. Because you see it happening in 1763. The English go down into the Caribbean and they capture Havana.
Wow.
and they give the Spanish a choice. We'll give you Havana back if you give us La Florida. Or we can just keep Havana. And of course, that was an easy choice, right? All the money is still being made in the Caribbean at this time.
Yeah,
especially,
yeah.
Especially with the Spanish, because see, the Spanish aren't concerned with the East Coast. The Spanish are concerned about the gold and the silver that they find across the Gulf there.
That's right.
In present day Southwest, California, Mexico, Central America, and of course, South America.
That's right.
So they were far more concerned about the gold than the East Coast of present day United States. So they said you can have it. So the British take over in 1763, and they keep it until 1781.
Wow.
They keep it about 20 years. And what happens is that the Spanish take advantage of the American Revolution, right? That comes in 1776. They go into the Caribbean and they capture Barbados.
Wow.
And they give them the same choice. We'll give you Barbados back if you give us La Florida. Or we can just keep Barbados. But at this time, that was the English prime sugar island.
Wow.
So that was out. So it was an easy choice for them. They gave La Florida back.
Wow.
You see, so in all of those things, right? That's basically how we see both United States as well as a lot of your states and Caribbean nations developing through either war or through agricultural expansion.
Yes, sir. Wow.
So Georgia is done through agricultural expansion. Florida is done through war. Alabama and Mississippi are done through agricultural expansion with cotton. Louisiana, of course, was simply bought.
Louisiana Purchase.
So,
Louisiana Purchase, I was just saying.
Right, that's what I'm saying, Louisiana Purchase. Which was bought for the ideas of agriculture.
Wow.
Agricultural expansion.
Wow.
And they could not have done it if it wasn't for the rest of the South. They wouldn't have had the money to buy the Louisiana Purchase.
For sure. Wow. That's so interesting. Dr. Dixon, during this time, of course, we're talking about pre-technological advances, when it comes to cell phones, GPS, all of those things of sorts. How did our enslaved ancestors know where to even run to, how to get to Florida, how to get to the Great Dismal Swamps? How did they know to trace those steps? And then who to even talk to during those times?
Well, two things. It's two things there, right? It's two basic. I don't know what a balloon is.
Oh, right. I saw the balloon.
It's two basic concepts, right? The first is, I don't know what that is, brother. Am I doing that? I don't know. Maybe that's somebody. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Anyway, probably like one of the little kid hackers. They hack Zoom calls.
The basic concept, first of all, is any movement and expansion, right? And when I say expansion, I mean migration, whether it's forced migration or however the case may be. Migratory patterns during these periods of time are going to be based on finding and locating a water source. Right? So they have to find a water source.
Wow.
The swamp provided the best area because it provided the water source that they needed, but it also provided one other thing, and that was the protection from whites.
Wow.
And that protection came primarily not through the alligators, as most people think, but primarily through the mosquitoes.
Okay, very interesting.
See, because mosquitoes at that time brought yellow fever.
Okay.
And whites and Europeans were highly susceptible to yellow fever.
Wow.
So, and this was known early in earlier periods within the transatlantic slave trade, as well as earlier periods, particularly in Low Country.
Yeah.
This is why you had what you call absentee ownership. You had all of these sugar plantations down on the coast of Carolina, down on the coast of Georgia, right? On the southern end of North Carolina, on the northern end of Florida, present-day Florida, right? All of these either rice or indigo plantations have a large number of mosquitoes.
Wow.
Right? Wow. Because mosquitoes need water to breathe.
Yep, that's right.
And so the water, though, and the mosquitoes was a signal for whites as danger, though. Because yellow fever could wipe out a whole family.
Wow.
One person in the house could get yellow fever. They have to be quarantined and everything else.
Wow.
And so they would have what would at that time, of course, the master's house or the quote unquote big house would be closer to up country, miles away. And so we had what we call absentee ownership.
Wow.
So they knew that. They knew that going into the swamps was an area that only the catchers would come into. They are not going to come into this area to try to build a colony.
Wow.
They're not going to come into this area to really try to expand.
Wow.
And so, again, the swamp provided those two things, right? They provided the water source and they provided the protection through the mosquitoes and yellow fever.
Wow. Wow. That's very interesting. Andrew Jackson made his political bones, if you will, in Florida, right?
Yes.
What did Andrew Jackson encounter and experience even while interacting and trying to war with the Seminoles during his time?
Well, what he did was he used the age-old tactic, right? And that age-old tactic has been used by the English, rather, pretty much since they came out of the Dark Ages. And that tactic was divide and conquer.
That's right.
Right?
That's right. That's right.
And so Andrew Jackson was able to recognize and understand the difference between the Seminoles and the Creeks and the factions of Creeks that had separated.
Right.
And so he was able to use that divide and conquer technique between the Creeks and the Seminoles.
Wow.
And so, and first he used it initially within the Creek Nation to figure out who was who, and then used it between the Creek and Seminole Nation. Right? And so with this divide and conquer technique, he was able to move all the way throughout the Panhandle and throughout the Gulf, and of course in New Orleans and the Battle of New Orleans and all of that good stuff with England in the War of 1812 by utilizing the different factions of Native Americans who didn't get along.
Wow.
Right? And so he is notified at the end of the War of 1812 by Plantation Society about the Negro Fort. He had heard about it, but now he was told, he was given full information. And so what the Negro Fort represented was the fact that these runaway, formerly enslaved people who had run away were given a fort by the British, and that meant that they were on their way to developing their own colony. And so that, they said, could not stand.
Right.
That plantation society would never reach its fullest potential if they knew that, if their enslaved knew that they could run away and reach the Negro Fort, and there was a colony of free blacks who had at some point absconded themselves. So Andrew Jackson obliges, he comes back through the Panhandle, and he burns the Negro Fort down.
Wow.
And then, of course, the First Seminole War begins. After the First Seminole War, we see the direct linkage between the First Seminole War and Florida becoming a territory. And so when Florida becomes a territory, what happens is the war ends in late 1818. Florida, by that spring, the United States and Spain went into a treaty in which Spain ceded Florida over to the United States.
Wow.
However, it gave them a 2-year transformation period. So basically, they just gave Spain 2 more years to collect taxes and get you whomever, whatever, things you want to leave. Let all of your citizens know of the change, because no telephones, right?
Right, exactly.
No internet. And then you got to be gone by 1821 with the official transfer of flags. But the treaty was signed in 1819.
Wow.
And so in 1821, when the United States takes over, Andrew Jackson is appointed territorial governor.
Wow.
So basically, though at this point, when you look at it in the early days, right, in the early periods, Florida was still more under military rule. And then, of course, they put themselves together, formed a territorial government, and had elections.
Wow.
But before that, Andrew Jackson was the governor, and he was only the governor for 9 months.
Wow.
And he got the political bug, went to DC, and the rest is history, right?
Man,
and so crazy. We also understand, though, that in this time, during this time in Florida, right? Because you have to understand at that time, La Florida stretched all the way to the Mississippi River.
Okay.
Alabama doesn't become a state until 1817. Mississippi doesn't become a state until 1819.
Wow.
So, and we're talking about the War of 1812. So that was all Florida, all the way to the Mississippi.
Wow.
And so I said all of that to say, right, the ideals of the Indian removal policy were initially developed by Jackson during his time and from his time he spent in La Florida.
Wow. That makes sense. That makes perfect sense. Wow. Listen, Dr. Dixon, this conversation, I'm thoroughly just enjoying this. I only have about 2 more questions. You've been so gracious with your time, of course.
Okay, no problem, brother.
Perfect. One of my last two questions, the Seminole Wars, right? What makes those wars so important, integral to Seminole history when it comes to their displacement, when it comes to genocide, when it comes to conflict, all of those factors? What makes the Seminole Wars so important?
Well, it's on different levels, right? Mm-hmm. The first level is for each Seminole War, we can see a direct linkage to how Florida develops as a state, right? And Florida is a very slow developing state.
Right.
I used to have to remind my students all the time, the city of Los Angeles is about 120 years older than the city of Miami.
Wow.
So that kind of gives you an idea of how slow Florida's development is, or was rather. And so that's the first thing, that each Seminole War has a direct linkage. The first Seminole War, after the first Seminole War, shortly thereafter, Florida becomes a territory. After the second Seminole War, 3 years later, Florida becomes a state. And part of those 3 years is because of the rules there, because you had to have a free state and a slave state come in the Union at the same time, right? Wow. You had to have a partner. Well, Florida's partner was Iowa.
Okay.
And so the third Seminole War, at the end of the third Seminole War, that was supposed to open up South Florida. But it ends in 1858, right? 3 years later, Florida is out of the Union and in the Confederacy and in the Civil War. So it takes them another 17, 18 years before they start reinvesting fully in the going back into Florida.
Wow.
And reaching South Florida, rather. Some parts they did as early as 10, but really when you start looking at the development, because Florida, Miami doesn't get incorporated until 1896.
That is fairly recent. Wow. Hey, that's almost 1900. That's crazy.
Yeah, that gives you an idea of the development, right? And so now that's on that level.
Right.
Now, as far as the African diaspora is concerned, Blacks need to understand that this was indeed the Seminole Wars were actually the resultant of culminating events that started from the beginning of the first Seminole War. From the first Underground Railroad.
Wow.
You see, the first Underground Railroad comes southward. And again, just like they're looking for the Dismal Swamp in other areas, they're looking for that water source.
That's right.
And that water source was the St. Johns River.
Wow.
And so they knew once they reached the St. Johns River that they were in La Florida and in Spanish territory.
Wow.
And so we have to understand that this is the first Underground Railroad. It was conducted by Blacks themselves, done by Blacks themselves. And then it culminated into their continued fight for freedom in these wars. Wow. And in that second Seminole War, that was indeed the largest and the most deadliest and the most successful slave rebellion in the United States history.
Wow.
Now, right? Remember we talked about the 3 phases of diaspora studies, right? We provide the voice to the voiceless. We make the cultural characteristics between the Gullah, between the Blacks within Native American groups and the runaways, all of that good stuff. The Gullah culture, it translating from the Geechee language to the ASC and all of that, the basket weaving technique from the Gullah that gets picked up and thrives throughout Black Seminole culture, all of that. So the third thing, right? The third thing is, what is the real value of all of this information, right? The real value of all of this information within the African diaspora, within Black studies and Black culture, is that it is the ultimate. It is the ultimate story of unity and what Black people can do when they come together.
Wow.
Because these Blacks were coming from different plantations.
That's right.
They had different origins.
Yep.
Then when they got into these Maroon villages and became the Florida Maroons, some of them had Native American culture. Some of them had full Maroon culture.
Right, yes.
Some of them were coming directly from the plantation as runaways. And they all came together and unified and ended up with the largest and most successful rebellion.
Wow.
Because all three of those groups worked together. And so that's the third part. There, right? What do we take away from knowing that this was the first Underground Railroad? What do we take away from knowing that this was the largest slave rebellion and most successful? What do we take away from that? We take away from that the concept of that they went against what was seemingly unsurmountable odds.
Wow.
They took on the U.S. military with all the resources and might it had, and they won because they won their freedom. The U.S. military gave up and said, fine, go live out west and be free then. And it was only because they unified.
Wow. Wow.
And that is what we take from that. And then the third thing, of course, is U.S. history. It's understanding that this history is part of U.S. history. Yes, I just did a speech last night in St. Augustine, right? And I took the same events that I knew they were well versed with, especially, being in St. Augustine, and some of them were part of the St. Augustine Historical Society. I took the same events and I gave it purely from the Black perspective. And they understood and saw things completely differently. Just by seeing it from the Black perspective, from the Black Seminole perspective.
That's right.
And so that's the importance there, right? That we get all Americans to understand that Black history, African-American history, is American history. It's the same events, it's the same things. It's from a different culture and perspective, which makes us more cohesive in learning each other's experiences.
Wow. My goodness, man. Dr. Dixon, you just wrapped that up perfectly. You already answered my very last question already over well done. Dr. Dixon, on the way out, first off, thank you again so much. Great information. I enjoyed this conversation thoroughly. On the way out, where can everybody follow you? Keep up with the Black Seminole Project, upcoming talks, lectures, speaking engagements, all that good stuff. How can they stay in touch with you?
Okay, hold on. Let me look at my board here.
But I get
everything right now that I have coming up between this month, May and June right now are all here in Florida.
Okay.
Let's see. We have there's an event that they're still working out. We're trying to get done, so you can contact me for more information on it. That may take place at the Negro Fort.
Okay.
At the end of May.
Okay.
Then I'll be in St. Petersburg on the 1st. I'll be in 1st of June. I'll be in Gainesville on the 6th of June. Oh, and I will be just outside of Tallahassee in Quincy on May the 4th.
Okay.
And then I'm doing the Juneteenth. One of the Juneteenths I have to do would be the 14th and 15th in Clearwater.
Okay.
Now you can catch me at profaedixon.com. You can get my books, particularly the Florida's Negro War, as well as for people who do reside in Florida. I have a book that is a timeline of Black history in Florida. Goes from the 1500s all the way up to about 2004.
Wow.
Again, that's profaedixon.com/books. My Facebook is Anthony Dixon. My Instagram is Prof. A.E. Dixon. What's the other? Twitter is Prof. A.E. Dixon. And I have to think about the YouTube again because my stuff got hacked. And so I had to go to new handles and everything. But definitely Facebook, Anthony Dixon. And from there, you can find the other ones. You can find me. Instagram is definitely the same, Prof. A.E. Dixon. The Instagram and the website are definitely the same, Prof. A.E. Dixon.
Yes, sir.
So you can reach me there. For those who I take questions all the time, it doesn't bother me. You can send them to Professor A.E. Dixon at gmail.com. Perfect. And I answer questions all the time.
I love that. Dr. Dixon, again, you did a phenomenal job. You broke down everything perfectly. So again, I appreciate you greatly. Keep doing all the great work that you've been doing.
One last thing. I'm sorry, I didn't think about it. One last thing.
Nah, you're good.
We would like everybody to support the Black Seminole Project. The Black Seminole Project is a documentary that discusses just what I said earlier, the history of the Black Seminoles from those 5 regions, the Bahamas, Florida, Oklahoma, Mexico, and Texas.
Yes, sir.
And then we discuss the issues that they are facing today. So it still is that story that everyone needs to hear about what we can do.
That's right.
And so then the other part of the project is the film, Ghost in the Grass. My book right here, Florida's Negro War, is being turned into a full feature-length film called Ghost in the Grass. In the Grass, excuse me. We would love for your support.
Yes, sir.
You can start by buying the book. The more popular the book is, the more we get momentum toward getting everything we need to get the documentary and film done, because proceeds from the book go directly to the project. So we love your support. We need your support to tell this story. Yes, we need our young people as well as our older and elderly people as well. That's right. To get back to those ideas of unification and what we actually can get done. And that's the underlying theme of the entire Florida Maroon and Black Seminole story. It's unification. Yes, sir. So by all means, go to blackseminoleproject.com, check us out, support us, get the book. Get the book as popular. We're trying to get the book as popular as we can so people will understand the significance and the need for the documentary as well as the film.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And Doc, I'll make sure to have all the links listed for the book, Black Seminole Project, all of that. So I got you on that part.
Thank you, brother.
Yes, sir. Hey, I appreciate you. Dr. Dixon, again, it was an honor. It was a privilege. So thank you again. You take it easy and you be safe.